In terms of AI, I think it's basically adapt or die. I think we're going to move more to a apprenticeship type model. I think it's going to be the end of, for my money, people may disagree, but I think it's going to be the end of the billable hour.
Hi, and welcome to It's Not the End of the World, Everyday Use Cases for AI. I'm here with Jerome Ranawake, lawyer and partner at Freshfields, which is a global law firm based here in New York. Jerome, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Pleased to be here. So we're one of the preeminent international law firms. We're now in the US growing rapidly, having originally been based in the UK, where we started off in the 18th century working for the Bank of England. We're now, having expanded internationally now, the real focus is on the US.
Established in the 1800s, you say, but the branding is very much, we are a firm that's looking at tomorrow.
Yes, very much so. From an AI perspective, I think we've won various tech awards, particularly for our collaboration with Google, using their structure, their Gemini structure, to create a proprietary tool internally. In terms of AI, it's basically adapt or die. I think in the next couple of years is the strategic message that we're communicating to our employees, because it really is it's difficult to articulate what a game changer it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's no bigger positioning than that. Adapt or die.
So for me, I think there's really been a tipping point probably in the last 6 months. If I just look at my own personal frequency with which I use AI, I mean, I started off using it once a month. Like many people, I had sort of inflated expectations and didn't invest enough time in it, and so was slightly deflated after my first few uses and abandoned it for a while.
But when was that? How long ago were we talking? When was the first?
I think that was probably beginning of the year, sort of. As I said, it's sort of 6 months. I think there's really been a transformation.
Well, okay, so you played with it 6 months ago,
and it's really transformed in terms of the tools that we've launched. The structured training that we've provided, we have a 7-unit structured training program ranging from everything from prompting to teaching people about data quality, everything you can imagine. I use Perplexity, OpenAI, and Claude for pure research.
When you're saying for pure research, are you talking about?
Meaning where it doesn't involve any client confidential data. I'm just looking for, simple question law as to, how a particular statutory provision has been interpreted in the courts, or has a particular case judgment been evolved.
Dumb it down for me. Yeah. So you need to do some research for a case that you're working on.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So we were kicking the tires on a bank resolution plan, and they were saying they would wind down a particular Delaware entity. And there was a reference to a particular form with the Delaware tax authorities. Very boring, classic boring admin task that is nevertheless very necessary to kind of dot the I's, cross the T's. Because we hadn't drafted, we spent a lot of time, a week or so, a couple of junior associates digging around, trying to work out where this came from. Couldn't find the answer. So they came back to me, and I thought, this is very odd, because obviously whoever drafted this originally, that didn't come from thin air, right? So I thought, well, this is unusual. I'll just plug it into Perplexity and see what Perplexity says. And sure enough, there was, immediately linked me through to the Delaware Tax Authority's website. It was a classic example of something where we'd researched something for a week and we found it in 10 seconds just by asking Perplexity.
Okay, so there's a very specific use case of their using, and that was just your first prompt.
Yeah, I found it immediately. And my experience, if you look at Perplexity versus Claude versus OpenAI or ChatGPT, first you get very, very different responses. And then secondly, some of them link you to more, it's very interesting to see quality of the sources varies enormously. I don't trust it at all. I immediately go to the links, firstly to assess the caliber of the links, and then from a reliability perspective, and then also to see, do the links actually reflect what it's told me is the summary of the advice. So that's why I always, before I I actively try not to be swayed by its answer and go straight to the sources.
Can you just kind of rank the ones? Which are what for us kind of laymen who maybe not as careful when we're using our AIs? Do you have a sense of which ones are particularly robust versus which ones are not? Which are the first two that you
I
go
would
to?
always use Perplexity first, then probably Claude, then ChatGPT.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, mostly because we don't have, subscription wise, I don't subscribe to all of them. So I
Yeah, of
get,
course.
I use the ones that I've sort of paid for the.
Yeah. Is that provided by the company?
So it's interesting. So as I said, we have this collaboration with Google where Gemini is incorporated into our proprietary AI page, and then we've subscribed to the NotebookLM, and then Copilot we have paid for, but then Perplexity and Claude we have not. So I'm using those.
Okay, so you have a preference. I mean,
yeah,
not to cast shade on your company's choices, but you have a preference for the other LLMs.
You need to delineate very clearly between those sites that you can share, that we've got comfortable that client confidential data is protected versus those that are not. So we, in a way, sort of deliberately not subscribing, not having the entire company to it makes that delineation much easier for people to understand. So everything that is subscribed for and Freshfields approved, we've got comfortable that our through collaborating with Google and others that our data is not going to end up on the web. And so I don't know. I'm not in charge of AI policy at Freshfields, but I think that keeping that distinction allows people to understand that when you're just going onto a website, whether it be Claude or Perplexity, you sort of understand that it's not something, because it's not sort of firm sanctioned. Although we do educate people how to use it, you sort of understand that no, it's got a different use case scenario must have nothing to do with client data.
Right. Okay. So you're doing the so it's almost like these AIs are sanctioned by Freshfields, so you'll use those. You get to experiment with those for specific tasks.
The other thing that I found sort of quite interesting is also to sort of being persistent with the tool. So, for example, I had a friend of mine who, this is not Freshfields work, but she was doing a report on a COVID response for the Isle of Man, and she was in particular focused on care homes, and was proselytizing about AI to her, and she said, well, let's type in the question, give me 10 examples of problems that occurred with care homes during the pandemic, right? And the first 10 were pretty generic. Sort of, I could describe it sort of MBA business speak is the sort of response. And then what was interesting was if you just kept saying, give me another 10, give me another 10. And we did this sort of 5 or 6 times. What was very interesting to me was if you did that with a human, they would probably by the second or third iteration, they probably start repeating themselves and just doing sort of essentially nuanced variations on what they'd originally cited as the first 10 issues with care homes. What was interesting I found with AI was that it didn't repeat itself. And so whilst it didn't give you the answer as to, how care homes could have improved their practices in response to the pandemic, what was interesting about it was that it got you out of your silo. It got you thinking about aspects of care homes that you perhaps wouldn't have focused on in that scenario. And so I thought, it didn't give the answer, but it acted as a stimulus for a broader approach to the problem.
That's a really interesting insight into just prompt engineering, right?
The fact that it was really unusually, when you want to say AI is not human, that was an aspect where I thought oh wow, this really isn't human because of this, it was unable to repeat itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I thought that was really quite, I found that very interesting.
And one of the criticisms I think of people that don't use it, frankly, is that, it's not creative. It can't be creative. There's this weird thing there where it has to be creative in that instance.
It doesn't. I think the mistake is to think that it has to give you the answer. Sometimes it's enough if AI just is the spark that gets you to think about something from a different angle.
Yeah, absolutely. I often think of it as like now the engine's always running for me.
Yeah.
I never stall really, because if I'm cognizant of the fact that I've got AI in my back pocket, I can come to a moment of, something that's stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah.
I can always just go to it and start kind of keep the engine running, and it will just start bouncing ideas back at me, or even just the act of like talking through my problem with it. It's just another way. This is just, it's a new tool, and trying to figure out how to get the results that you want from it for the human at the end of the process to then have the ideas that they need to shape and present.
Constant refinement. It's what's also changed, I think, is our clients are now asking us how we're using AI and demanding that we use it. How are you using AI, and how is it going to save me money?
So the question then is around impact. I don't want to go too far down the road of, what's going to be the side effects of this. But if you'll indulge me in a little bit of that speculation, I think that would be interesting.
If you have thousands of claims being filed against you, and you need to quickly review them, summarize them, work out what the arguments are on each claim, and address them, we use Google NotebookLM. If you have previous negotiations where the similar points have come up, issues have been raised by the other side, you can upload 5 previously negotiated documents.
How big is that document?
It can be anything from, in my world, anything from 30 to 300 pages.
Wow, okay. So you can put a 300-page document into NotebookLM.
Yeah. And you can load, up to sort of, I think it's 24 in one sort of mini library. You create a mini library. Then you have your issues list, and then you say, if you then train it to say, okay, here's my issues list. Have these points ever been negotiated before in the library of documentation? And can you make suggestions as if they have, if the same provision has been negotiated, can you make suggestions based on this library of documentation as to what the proper outcome should be?
That's you're directing that question at NotebookLM.
At NotebookLM. Now, I would say, so it's very good at generating the issues list very quickly, which saves, that's a few hours right there. It's way behind, and why I'm not worried about our profession at all, and why human input will, the judgment and sort of commercial judgment involved and drawing on that experience, it really does a pretty bad job. But it's still helpful nevertheless. I've learned that even if you're disappointed, you should always take the time, just like you would with an associate once you'd marked up their work, to upload what you ultimately sent out and say, actually, this is what I sent out, and please internalize this for future analysis.
Okay. So the associate is a junior member of the firm. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I hear the same, reflections in my line of work and in other people I speak to. One of the things you have to get your head around is that this thing is both human-like, in the sense that you need to speak to it like it's a human and give it feedback like it's a human, but also not a human. So you shouldn't have high expectations. Equally, it's not like a traditional machine either. We're so used to, you put 2 + 2 into a calculator and you get a perfect answer.
Yeah.
And you expect your machines to do perfect things.
No, exactly. And our job is about excellence and precision, as with many other professions, and instilling that sort of respect for the level of precision and care that's required in our newer employees who've been brought up on ChatGPT is one of the key parts of our training program, because if they don't learn very quickly about the fact that human validation will always be required, you're obviously going to have major issues with quality. And there have been obviously very highly publicized reports about some relatively rinky-dink lawyers, but still, submitting briefs using AI that cited cases that didn't exist, and the judge, fining them and potentially getting themselves disbarred as a result. So it's a real problem. So one of the things I've been advocating for in the firm, and we've done a very good job of in terms of our training program, I think, is that you should, when you're training, you should spend, half the time talking about all the possibilities and how it's going to revolutionize the work environment and the change in mentality that's required to successfully integrate AI into your process. But you should also spend the other half talking about all the risks. It's always surprising how it can
go off the rails,
go off the rails in unexpected ways.
I mean, sometimes I find that the longer the conversation with the AI, the more likely it is then to start going off the rails. Yeah. I am struck, though, listening to you speak. I mean, it's just such an overwhelming amount of change.
So the most common way, as I mentioned, in sort of class action lawsuits, you've got multiple claims being filed against you in multiple different jurisdictions, multiple different courts. And to stay on top of them, you have to very quickly summarize the essence of the pleadings made against your client.
And usually that would have been done by...
I mean, associate would have had to do it. So that, An example would be claims filed against Volkswagen for the issues with its diesel engines. You have to work out strategically very quickly, how to respond to these claims. Thousands and thousands of different actions against you.
Thousands of claims have come in. Usually the associate would go through them, summarize them. Now the associate will put them through, have your AI tool summarize all of these documents
very, very quickly. And you can work, and what's really helpful is it can help you prioritize very quickly. Almost invariably, it's a very tight timeline, and you'll have a due diligence room full of thousands and thousands of documents. And what we've developed is standardized prompting for review of those documents to very quickly identify sort of red flag issues.
Give me some more clarity here. So a room full of documents, give me a sense of the scale of that, what a room full of documents might look like.
I think that our record was, it's tens of thousands of pages of documentation that you need to summarize very quickly.
And you can put that into, which one is it? NotebookLM? Is that what that all goes into?
And we can just summarize. We can produce due diligence reports very quickly based on that. And again, they need to be verified. But what's quite helpful, it will identify issues that need to be raised very early on. Obviously, you have to conduct your due diligence, with that in mind. But if there's some obvious red flag issues, it can help you from a speed perspective identify red flag issues very quickly.
Okay, so let's talk about the side effects of this then. Previously, a room full of lawyers, you can imagine the old romantic image was, lawyers in rooms full of boxes. I say romantic, but in the movies, you'd see them with boxes of files.
And obviously experience played into the reason why you get partners involved. You were paying them for their experience because they would know where to look for the red flag issues very quickly. Right.
And now NotebookLM is giving you the answers, and then you're just checking those answers to see whether or not they seem realistic or viable. And then someone like yourself is digging deeper just to make sure that you agree with what NotebookLM.
If it identifies a potential red flag issue, then obviously you go to the core source and work out is it actually accurate? What?
So where I'm going with this though is, what does that do? Okay, so you're talking about clients want to cut costs, right? My boss and your friend, Jez, when I spoke to him, what keeps him up at night is not everyone losing their jobs. It's the speed at which we can now do our jobs. Right? Clients don't want to spend as much money on the thing.
It's a leveraging of yourself. It's not replacement. I'm not worried about it because it's all, what people, you can't substitute judgment in experience. And obviously, also, you're dealing with human beings, right? Human beings have a range of emotions. Negotiating, you have to read the room, you have to work out what's important to people. That's the kind of thing that I think, maybe AI will get there eventually, but there's a deeply human element as well, outside.
No, don't dispute that. But right in this moment, though, there is an obvious amount of hours that are saved. By using NotebookLM.
And so there were some clients who said, well, I'm not going to pay for first year associates, right? So there was already pressure on law firms. There was already pressure from clients as to, we're only going to pay for judgment and experience. So if someone, in our view, isn't adding any value yet, we either want to pay for them much less for them or So, and the AI now, of course, is an overlay to that, right? Because some of the tasks that previously involved a lot of hours of associates from a due diligence perspective, but didn't necessarily require judgment and experience. Those tasks are now more conducive to automation because of AI, right? And the human step is more the sort of verification of what AI has produced. But if clients are only going to pay for judgment and experience, how do you get associates enough exposure to get them to a level of judgment experience that clients are willing to pay for? The longer term consequences are sort of twofold. One is that I think the training model is going to change completely, right? In the sense that I think we're going to move more to a apprenticeship type model where you have someone essentially shadowing someone for sort of a year, 2 years, 3 years, helping out here and then, but basically, I don't think you can gain the judgment experience that clients are increasingly only going to be willing to pay for without observing it in action. So you need associates to have a lot more exposure much earlier on in their career to get them to a position where they have judgment experience.
Honestly, it sounds like that's actually quite a positive side effect. What I'm hearing is that the rote automatic work, grunt work has
Yeah.
been devalued to
Yeah.
such an extent by AI
Correct.
that
That
now
people like, yeah.
that people don't even want to pay for it.
Exactly.
One of the trends I'm seeing across all industries is that it does seem to be moving us more towards the premium is on interpersonal relationships.
What I'm most excited about those conceptual leaps, though, with huge pools of data, because I think it might lead to actual sort of moments of what we would have previously described as genius. I mean, if you talk to any doctor, of course, I'm sure, you know, everyone thinks the pace of change in medical research is going to be, again, unprecedented. This all goes back to what we were talking about earlier on about just it's almost impossible. The pace of change is so fast that it's almost impossible for humans to understand it, I guess, is the way it's been described to me, at least.
Yeah. Well, I've got a fun anecdote I'll share with you, because I heard it on another podcast back in 2012 when they were talking about AI will come, and talking about exponential growth. And they told this anecdote of two computer scientists in a bar chatting about exponential growth.
Yeah.
And in order to illustrate exponential growth, there's a story of the man that invented chess.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard this tale?
No.
So the tale goes that the man who invented chess was some Indian peasant in, many centuries AD or BC, I should say. And he invented the game and presented it as a gift to the emperor.
Yeah.
And the emperor was so taken with it, they wanted to give this poor, humble peasant any reward that he would like. So the humble peasant, but a humble man, said, I'll just take, I don't want much. I'll just take a grain of rice for every square on the chessboard. But if you could just double the amount that was on the previous square, that's all I ask.
Right.
And the emperor, so bowled over by this man's humility, said, "Of course, I grant this wish." Right, and there's 64 squares on the chessboard, and so square one is 1 grain of rice, square two is 2, 4, 8. You can kind of do the maths in your head for at least 16 of the squares. But by the time you get to square 32, I think it's like more rice than a rice paddy, if that's right. But by the time you get to square 64, it's more rice than it's more than rice that humans have ever produced in all time. It would be larger than Mount Everest. It would cover all of India in 4 feet of rice. Or to put it another way, if you were to line the rice grains up end to end, it would stretch all the way to Alpha Centauri, which is the nearest star, and back again to Earth 3 times. That's how much rice we're talking. So up to 32 squares on the chessboard, sort of reasonable. But once you get, we're talking exponential growth again. Yeah. Once you get to the second half of the chessboard, it gets unfathomable. Yeah. And humans just can't quite get their head around it. And so these computer scientists were like, well, where on the chessboard are we now? Right. And they were saying, probably the iPhone is around sort of, we're getting to around square 32. Yeah. Well, I mean, where are we now?
Yeah. No, exactly.
I mean, and as you say, it's just all happening so fast and so crazily. Anyway, that was a little bit of fun, existential.
No, it's amazing.
Existential noodling. But before we finish up, I do want to get to the kind of the more practical part of the podcast. So you've done a lovely job of describing all of the kind of impacts. Was there anything you wanted to say before?
Well, no, there was this one. I was going to say the other big thing that's going to change in terms of going back to this judgment experience and what clients will actually pay for. I think it's going to be the end of, for my money, people who may disagree, but I think it's going to be the end of the billable hour. And I think that's no longer going to be tenable with AI. I think you're going to have to move to, at least in the kind of work that I do, you have to move more to kind of a fixed fee model, where rather like what investment bankers have, where you take a sort of a percentage. Your fee is determined by a percentage of the size of the transaction involved, and potentially, uplifted if there's a success or not. But it'll be driven by a fixed fee that in turn is based on the sort of perception of how much value you're adding to the transaction actually getting done. The business model of law firms was predicated on, a swarm of busy bees. The most profitable work was large-scale litigation, where you have, 15 associates working through the data room that we described. That's obviously you're not going to need, you're not going to be generating that amount of hours, and you're going to have to articulate your value add to the whole proposition very, very differently. And I think for me, that means that ultimately the billable hours is probably going to be history.
Let's get to the more fun bit of the podcast,
Right.
which is the quick tips. So this is where we're gonna kind of bring it back to less cerebral stuff and more just practical, pragmatic use cases for anyone and everyone who could learn a thing or two from someone who's been using it for with some anxiety for the past 6 months or so. So the first one, I want just like a general tip that you would give to somebody that would probably applicable to anybody when you're using these tools.
The prompting, we had a prompting lecture, which I found very helpful. The GCSE, have you heard that? It's basically when you're prompting, goal, context, source, expectation,
Okay.
GCSE.
Goal, context, source, expectation.
Right.
Goal, context, source, expectation. All right, go through each of those.
Right,
So goals,
so-
obvious.
Yeah, so goal, context, so it's helpful when you're prompting to say, I am a lawyer working at an international law firm for a client who does. So you wouldn't think that would be relevant to the AI, but it actually is relevant to the quality of the response you get.
Right. Okay.
Sources, okay, limit your information to these sources. Do not, you can say, provide a link to every where you get the information. So that's basically sort of setting the framework for where it should draw its information from.
Mm-hmm.
And then expectation is more about the format, how the data should be presented in tabular form, what it should emphasize. Should it quote all the section references within the text, things like that. So it's sort of, I've found when I'm prompting, I found that because oftentimes your prompts are too short.
Right, brilliant tip. All right.
And with that comes the point of it just not giving up in terms of the iterating. I'd go back to that point where, whenever you get a generic response, you're probably the problem because your prompting wasn't precise enough.
But don't beat yourself up too much. Mental health is important. Okay, goal, context, source, expectation. I'm going to just try and apply that now as an example. So my goal might be I'm looking for camera lenses. The context is I'm a camera operator working in New York City. The source, I want you to look at let's say Amazon, 2, 3, 4, 5 different camera stores that I know.
And then expectations, set it out in a tabular form, comparing price, accessibility, whatever. I found it a very helpful framework from a prompting perspective.
That's a great framework. I must admit that I sort of, sometimes, it's funny. I think you sort of have these frameworks that kind of help you with it. And then you sort of drop them after you sort of know how it's going to react to certain things and you'll dip into them and dip out of them. Okay, great tip in the general sense. Now, one more specific tip that's very specific to you. It doesn't have to be necessarily within your professional environment.
So I'm a huge fan. So I love hiking, but I'm too old to carry a tent.
Okay.
So I like now to go hike from hotel to hotel, generally with a mountain pass in between.
Oh, right. Nice.
So what I like to do is say, okay, I want to do the GR20 in France, big hiking trail, 2 or 3 weeks worth of hiking minimum. Anyway, the point being, I say, okay, I want to stay in hotels. I want to have no more than 5,000 feet elevation up and down each way in a given day. I want to, stay predominantly in hotels, maybe with the occasional hut thrown in, create an itinerary. But it is amazing how quickly it can do that in a way that there's no way in a million years you would even know where to break down where the hotels were, etc.
And is that accurate, or is it just?
It's spot on always. Yeah,
really?
For travel, it's amazing. Yeah,
really, I didn't know it would be spot on. I imagine there'd be some sort.
But that's what I mean by giving it. If you give it the parameters, it can really create like the perfect. And you can say, So I basically did elevation up and down, how many miles as the crow flies, and then specifications as to the kinds of places I wanted to stay, and then basically, where I wanted roughly to start and where I wanted to end.
In that situation, thinking about your GCSE piece of advice,
are
you giving it a sort, goal obvious, context obvious, source though? Are you telling it to check out certain sources, or are you a bit lazy about that and just give it the expectation?
I mean, the internet's so full of information on that. They don't really need to specify the source.
That's kind of it, right? I can imagine myself going, I don't want listeners going, oh, GCSE, I'm going to use it every time, because I can imagine you get to source and be like, I don't even know what.
The information's so ubiquitous that you don't need to. Yeah. But I found it really, it's absolutely incredible for that.
That's amazing. That's great. I'm looking forward to doing the G20 or G10 myself in years to come.
GR10, yeah.
with Jerome's AI tips, the wind in my wings or sails.
Yeah.
So final tip is a fun or unexpected use case.
So the other day, I was thinking to myself how much I loved Karmann gears, the old Volkswagens, beautiful, the most beautiful shape, one of the most beautifully shaped cars, famously with a terrible engine.
And what's it called?
The Karmann gear, the Volkswagen Karmann gear. It was basically like a aerodynamic version of a Volkswagen Beetle that they created with a very famous designer whose name escapes me. But it's as beautiful as like the Citroen DS, or it's like one of the most beautiful cars ever made. And I put into Perplexity, I said, okay, drawing on the example of how BMW converted the old Mini into, what is now what we all understand to be a Mini nowadays, kind of keeping the character of the car, but modernizing it, create the equivalent of a Karmann gear that could be produced by Volkswagen. And what it produced, honestly, I literally want to just hand to Volkswagen and say, why are you not making this now? Because it was really astonishing to me how it kept the spirit of the 60s design. I think it's 1960s design, but, in a modern context. Interestingly, I tried it then. I was like, so impressed. I was like, I'll try it with a Citroen DS. Okay. Total disaster. It came out with this like unbelievably generic car that was like you would never buy in a million years. But the Karmann gear was just fantastic.
That's so interesting.
I mean, I almost felt like sending it to the chairman of Volkswagen and saying, you need to build this car. So it's just that. So again, from a use case scenario, I thought that was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, that's the image generators, right? Yeah, and that was Perplexity. I didn't realize Perplexity had image generators.
Yeah, it can. Yeah,
yeah, that's cool.
I mean, I'm sure they're better ones than what I.
Well, yeah, there certainly would be, but they're all interesting. The Gemini one is really kind of making waves at the moment, but ChatGPT's got a fun one that you can use. All of those are accessible and easy to play around with. So maybe see how they get on with the same prompt. That's fun. Okay, look, we've got one final piece of advice that we need to extract from you before we close up shop. But we've been dancing around various cautionary tales, if you like, but your watch out. So something that you need to watch out for when using these tools, and perhaps so that we don't end on such a bleak tone, maybe you can tell us how to mitigate for all these things.
I think the watch out. I think you got to remember AI is a drug.
That's interesting. I wasn't expecting you to go there.
If you have success with AI, you shouldn't let that success obscure your suspicion of AI.
Don't get complacent. Remain skeptical. Keep your guard up. That's good advice for any New Yorker.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think it never ceases to amaze me how far from left field some of the hallucinations come from that when you're least expecting them, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's a nice piece to end on. So thank you so much for coming in, Jerome. It's been really, really interesting. And to the viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you next time, unless it really is the end of the world.